You know, I wasn't really expecting to make 2 videos covering DLC so close together, but here we are. Spoiler warning for Xenoblade 1 through 3. Thanks to the latest teaser for Xenoblade Chronicles 3's Expansion Pass Wave 4, we've got plenty of new content to speculate on as to the direction of this brand new side story. While I am slightly disappointed at the prospect of a prequel DLC, because it means we're probably not going to see our favourite Ouroboros reunite, we'll at least get to see more characters and places from previous games in that gorgeous Xenoblade 3 look. And by God, did they look glorious. Heck, the entire direct trailer feels like a little love letter to the entire series. Shulk wielding the Monado Rex, wearing the same dumb turtleneck from Xenoblade 1, Rex being, well, giga-chatted and buff now, dual-wielding both Aegis swords because why the hell not? And then the return of Bionis Leg, with the stupid bridge where Juju's buggy was. Yeah, in all honesty, that area wasn't all that important, but it's still cool to see. They even brought back the man, the myth, the monkey, the territorial Rotbart, after his disgraceful absence from base Xeno 3. And because of all the cool little details Monolith Soft jam-packed into this minute-long trailer, we have a lot to look forward to, which only makes me more excited for what the future holds. Alright, that's enough padding. Let's cut straight to the chase. The real reason I'm making this video isn't to gush over all the little things this trailer shows. It's to talk about the third Aegis, the Monado himself, ALVIS. Because boy oh boy does he look like he's got some major beef with the dilfed up Shulk and Rex. The last time we saw ALVIS was during the ending of Xenoblade 1, where he appeared to leave Bionis on a rather positive note, talking about how the life of Shulk's world would walk towards the future hand in hand. So it's quite shocking to see him opposing the same person he once entrusted the power to reshape the world to. Obviously, ALVIS's appearance raises a whole lot of questions that we just don't have the answers to. What's going on? Where are they right now? Why is ALVIS using Monado 1 instead of Monado 2 or 3? And finally, what the hell is ALVIS thinking? As I stated mere seconds ago, we don't have a lot of answers right now. All we can really do is speculate until either the next trailer releases or until the DLC actually comes out to have these questions answered directly. Hopefully. It is a Takahashi game after all. The options are scarce, but because one of them forces me to wait, I'll take a swim in the speculatory pool over sitting on the sad and lonely waiting for release bench any day. So let's just dive straight into it. Firstly, let's just quickly list out a few key things that we already know about the DLC. 1. The DLC story is most definitely a prequel focused on the founders of the city. We can tell this because we catch a glimpse of founder Vandam in the flesh right at the end of the trailer. We also know this is founder Vandam as he perfectly matches the Vandam statue in Memorial Hall. And judging by how the in-game teaser image for Wave 4 has a picture of him, I'm going to guess he'll be taking on a similar role to Laura from the Torna DLC by being our prequel protagonist, as we possibly join forces with the other founders and attempt to stop Zed. Or ALVIS. Or whoever the DLC wants us to stop. 2. Shulk and Rex are not in the cycle, and they will more than likely play a pivotal role in the DLC's story. To address their status as people outside of the cycle, we need to look no further than their physical appearance, as well as the statues in Memorial Hall. Firstly, their ages. Given the much older physical appearance of both Shulk and especially Rex, we can tell that they're definitely over 20, which is the cap for the cycle. And before you say they might just look older than they actually are, the photo of Rex from the Xeno 3 ending shows him in what looks like his early 20s. And with Rex being clearly older than in the photo, it's practically impossible for Rex to be within the cycle. On top of that, there's the statues for founders Reed and Cassini within Memorial Hall, which both share a design with Shulk and Rex respectively. It's also important to note that these statues of Shulk and Rex do not suggest them to be Ouroboros. The descriptions for each comment on how they were the actual founders' mentors, and were important enough to said founders for them to build a monument to them in the form of these statues. So if this DLC really is following the founders, I'd expect that their supposed mentors would be playing some kind of important role, instead of just a one-off cryptic appearance. Especially since we haven't seen Shulk lose his arm or Rex his eye like the statues say they did. 3. The DLC is set in Ionios once again. If the appearance of founder Vandam and the confirmation that Rex and Shulk are indeed the statues for houses Cassini and Reed wasn't enough to convince you that we are definitely in Ionios with this prequel, then this short sweeping shot of the new area we'll probably be exploring will blow your mind. As we can see, the same hand that was present in base Xeno 3. Presumably this is the hand of Mor Ardane's Titan, but that's only a theory and not actually confirmed. Regardless, the hand's presence does confirm that the DLC is still set in Ionios, and not Bionis or Olrest again. An additional tidbit is how the area isn't identical to its appearance in Xeno 1, further implying that the worlds are still fused together, i.e. Ionios. Okay, so keeping this information in mind, let's actually talk about ALVIS. Being the third Aegis Ontos, ALVIS has strong ties to Xeno 2. But as you're already aware, his first and only appearance is still in Xeno 1. As a result, ALVIS has ties to both the worlds of Xeno 1 and 2, making him an ideal link between the two of them from a narrative standpoint. It just so happens that the narrative role he's probably going to fill is an antagonist. After Zed filled the role of main antagonist with Xeno 3, I've been wanting a solid return to form for our Xeno villains. Because while I do like Zed as a character and from a narrative standpoint, he's certainly lacking in comparison to the other game's main baddies. Hell, Mobius as a whole were quite weak villains, with the exclusion of N, who is probably one of the best antagonists the series has had. So generally speaking, I'm wagering that ALVIS is going to be a bit more complex as to his motives and reasoning for opposing Shulk and Rex. And put emphasis on the word opposing here, as we don't know for certain what ALVIS's role in Ionios could be. To help spark some discussion on this specific topic, I've actually prepared a few ideas as to what ALVIS's motivations could be for the DLC. Starting with 1. ALVIS is Zed. This is probably the weakest theory I have, but as I think the idea could have some credence, I've decided to share it anyway. With ALVIS's status as an Aegis in mind, there's always the possibility he pulled a Mithra and created an alternative personality, with this personality being Zed. Admittedly, there's hardly anything here to confirm this theory, as saying ALVIS and Zed are the same person is like saying peanut butter and the German war technique Blitzkrieg are the same thing. Which, in case you can't tell, they're not. The only point I can really make in this theory's favour is how Pyra and Mithra have points where they seem like direct opposites, just like ALVIS and Zed do. Pyra is good at cooking while Mithra is bad at it. Pyra is calmer and more reserved, while Mithra is more abrasive and reckless. Pyra is... you know what? You probably get the point by now. For this reason, I could see how the regularly passive observer, ALVIS, could develop a personality that is the opposite of his own, with it being very involved and downright controlling just like Zed is. But, like I said earlier, there isn't much to say this theory is worth believing, only that it's worth considering. If it was true, however, it would imply that ALVIS is the creator of Ionios. But I think discussing who made Ionios is a point better suited for discussion in 2. ALVIS is Origin, the machine. From Nia's dialogue in the base game, we can assume that the Nopon that assisted in the creation of Origin was Tora. And given that Tora had access to the information surrounding the Aegises and the Trinity processor, thanks to living in Olrest, information that could help save them from total oblivion, there's a good chance this knowledge was used in collaboration with the people of Bionis to develop Origin, by utilizing ALVIS and possibly Pyra and Mithra's powers as well. And with the whole the world's only able to communicate through light deal, ALVIS appearing as a literal bowl of light during the climax of Xeno 1, and Mithra being a light blade, is a good indication of it being entirely possible that this communication between the worlds was only done through the shared power of the Aegises. ALVIS being Origin would not only justify Rex's heartless machine line, but would also explain his antagonistic role in 3, as he'd be the one to create Aionios, with Mobius just being the ones who maintain it. This would also keep Zed separate from ALVIS, which I think is for the best, as it keeps Zed as the collective fear of the future still, not detracting from Xeno 3's amazing finale of the two worlds overcoming their own fears of the future, where Origin might fail, all so they can move forward. ALVIS has also displayed the ability to create entire worlds in Xeno 1's ending, and maybe the reason for the annihilation events occurring in Aionios is because, unlike before, this world is imperfect, as he can't use the full power of the conduit to help shape it. Of all my theories today, this is the one I personally believe the most, but I will admit that it isn't perfect. But before any of that, let me discuss why I personally believe it. As I brought up in my last point, ALVIS has always been very passive, neutral at times as well. He gave visions to both Shulk and Zanza despite them being in conflict with each other, and he only decided who to give the true Monado to once the scales of the battle tipped in Shulk's favour. Because of this, I've always interpreted ALVIS as a character who was open to the options laid out before him. I'd imagine that if Shulk began to lose to Zanza, then ALVIS might have even remained by Zanza's side. He's a guy who chooses to stand by his loyalties, but I'd say that getting him to switch sides isn't impossible, just like we see in Xeno 1. He's always open to new suggestions on how the world should be, and he'd rather let others decide while he watches and observes from afar. Hell, for most of Xeno 1, he just casually walks around spouting vague shit until people draw their own conclusions, rather than giving them a direct answer on what to do. For this reason, I'd assume that ALVIS would be willing to create Aionios, not because he's some evil tyrant, but because he wanted to help the majority of the two worlds, who were genuinely terrified of continuing with Origin, as it might fail, leaving them in total oblivion. And going back to Xeno 1's climax again, specifically to when ALVIS asks Shulk what type of world he should create, Shulk responds with this line.
I won't decide. The future should be decided by each and every person in the world. And so, what we wish for is a world with no gods!
So why do I bring this up? Simple. Because if ALVIS is Origin and the one to create Aionios, then he's doing exactly as Shulk once said. Think about it. Zed was born from the collective fear of the future within each person. If that is true, which we know it is, then the people obviously all felt the very same emotion and wanted the exact same thing. An out. Aionios only exists because humanity wanted to stay put, to not progress lest Origin fail. So ALVIS is just shaping the world exactly as the people decided it to be, just like Shulk wanted him to. This would also perfectly explain ALVIS being in opposition to Shulk. With Shulk's caring nature, he would easily be disgusted with Aionios' constant cycle of death and rebirth. And in turn, ALVIS would be disgusted with Shulk, not only for going against the masses' wish for Aionios' existence, but for Shulk going against his word about the world being shaped by those within it. I think it's an interesting dynamic for Xenoblade to explore, especially with how it leaves ALVIS in a spot whereby, sticking to his promises, he's neither in the right or wrong completely, a role which his observationalist nature lends itself to quite nicely. Oh, and do try to keep these points in your brain for a bit, as we move on to my next and final theory for the day. 3. ALVIS isn't an antagonist. Whilst the Shulk's word mini-theory obviously works in tandem with the Origin one, which is why I brought it up in the last point, it could work just as, if not better, from a completely different angle. When Xeno 3 was first revealed, and all the way up until its release, Nia and Melia were hyped up as villains. This obviously didn't come true, as the queens we were seeing were fakes, while the real ones were busy being their usual badass selves. The point is, just because ALVIS is framed as an antagonist, it doesn't mean he will be. By looking at a different angle, it's possible that ALVIS was brought into Aionios in a similar fashion to the other returning characters. But, unlike them, rather than rebel against Mobius to try and free themselves from it, he chose to permit Aionios' existence, and stand to the sidelines. This could be for similar, if not the exact same reason as the last point, or perhaps he just wishes to observe the outcome. This would once again put him at odds with Shulk and Rex, as they might be trying to persuade him to use his Aegis powers to set them all free. But, just like I said in the last point, he's disgusted with Shulk. This time for Shulk believing that ALVIS would listen to him because Shulk's word on Ionios' existence is more valuable than the masses, merely because Shulk knows ALVIS. Which would be in direct contrast to Shulk's wish for a world with no gods, since, you know, believing you have and taking priority over others because of your relationship to a being of great power is pretty godlike in the Xenoblade universe. Anyway, this once again creates an interesting dynamic between ALVIS and Shulk, creating friction between them from the words of the very first time they truly joined together. Regardless, there are many angles they could take with ALVIS, antagonist or not, and as I'm not as knowledgeable with ALVIS as, say, Malos or Noah, I did still try to provide some meaningful discussion on the topic where I could. So let me know your thoughts and feelings on ALVIS' inclusion in Xenoblade 3 down in the comments below. Do you think he'll be a villain with a complex motive, or is he simply doing a little bit of trolling? Well, whatever he's cooking, I'm sure that it's going to be hella interesting. My only concern as an ALVIS' Origin believer is that ALVIS being Origin might make Origin, you know, way more confusing than it already is, because let's be honest, in base Xeno 3, how many of us actually, like, heard what Origin was and what happened to Origin, and then just, like, immediately understood everything? Because I can guarantee you no one did. It's super confusing at times. So, I just hope it stays confusing and not, like, super ultra confusing. Get me? Regardless times 2, I do hope you enjoyed the ramblings of a Xenoblade enjoyer, trying to make sense of a minute-long teaser for a DLC expansion that won't be out until probably September. As always, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm FabApples, and remember, always tie your shoelaces.